Hello, I have perfected Funko Fusion on Steam by collecting all 42 achievements. This includes popping over 100 heads, petting 5 huskies, aiding Mega Man, and a lot more we'll touch on a bit later. Welcome to my full review. Funko Fusion is a cooperative action-adventure puzzle platform crossover being developed and published by 1010 Games, completely based off their licensed Funkos and inspired by many classics. Full disclosure, I was graciously sent a review copy of the game. You can find all the information you need down below, but with that in mind, it will not be altering my opinions on the title. Starting off with the settings, visually, it's quite nice, and I like the sticker aesthetic and it not being over the top. Defaulting on the camcorder, you got all the graphical options you could ever ask for. I highly recommend sitting through and figuring out what works best for you, as this game can be quite demanding. And once you're in-game, a chunk of these options will become unavailable. My biggest complaint here comes with the motion blur, as even with it turned off, there is a forced blur with the movement, which provided me many headaches. Anyway, the audio tab is nicely separated, however missing a streamer mode option for all the copyrighted music. The play button holds your UI related options, including language, and the keyboard icon is your sensitivity. I found this a bit strange not being key bindings, however those can be found in the controls tab at the very bottom under control mapping, also a bit weird. But the game supports PS4, 5, and Xbox Series X hardware. However, through some testing, you won't have many problems using any other controller. While it is highly recommended, it is completely playable on mouse and keyboard, and while I prefer that for aiming, it does feel a lot smoother on sticks. Steam Deck compatibility is currently unknown, however being a controller game it might work out, so if it works for you, let us know down below. Lastly, we have the handicapped controller holding your accessibility options such as aim assist, subtitles, and an arachnophobia mode, which I found quite amusing. As for the technical side of things, please note I'm running this off a low to high-end PC, so how this performs for me might not perform the same for you. With that being said, surprisingly, this is the first game to push my machine to its limits and showed me I need to start slowly looking at building a new one. I can however run this game on the highest quality options, but that will guarantee crashing, so I suffice with running on medium, which still looks pretty okay. When you first launch the game, you're immediately thrown into compiling shaders. This obviously ramps my CPU to 100, making it almost impossible to do the settings it's trying to tell me to do. Yet after the shaders are compiled, I still had many issues with texture streaming, memory leaks, stuttering, random crashes, screen tearing, and more. The funniest issue I had was with gambling my life away, as it was very much a 50-50 if the game would cause itself to crash after every single death. Thankfully, I avoided this issue by abusing health pickups and just simply not dying. The real major issue I had was with the motion blur. I could only play the game for a few hours at a time, as the headaches it provided was unpleasant. That said, throughout all my gameplay, I only came across 2 bugs. The first being with any speech bubble that appears above your head. It can randomly just stay there forever, blocking your view until you find another one to replace it. This most commonly happened in the Thing levels, but I had it elsewhere as well. The second bug I encountered was with the quest to unlock a new layer of levels. It would just vanish, preventing you from progressing. This is quite game-breaking, however relaunching the game fixes it, but it can be annoying to do every single time. Overall, the vast majority of my gameplay was quite smooth, regardless of it being heavily unoptimized. Looking at playthroughs after the fact, I'm not the only one who suffered with these issues, so take that with a grain of salt if you don't have a top-of-the-line PC. As for the difficulty, there are no options. The difficulty of the game comes with its basic gameplay and what you want within the chapters. If you're just focusing story, it's pretty easy overall, and the most challenging parts will be the combat or understanding where your main objective is, as it's not always obvious. If you're looking to 100% every location, you'll need to finish the base game prior anyway, as a lot of the difficult puzzles come into already owning certain characters or abilities not unlocked until further in. I'm not the biggest fan of how this was treated, but it works out nicely for its replayability, as you'll need to replay the entire game anyway, just this time with everything at your disposal. On the difficulty scale, I would rate it at a solid hard. While most base levels are fairly easy, a lot of the bonus content can be extremely difficult to the point of almost feeling unfair. Yet those are the moments that kept me intrigued while playing. The game now also has a co-op mode where you can play with your friends locally or online by inviting them to your world and going through levels with them to unlock special coins to purchase additional outfits. I have no friends, but thankfully you can grind it out solo as well. As for the gameplay, in short, Funko Fusion is a third-person, story-focused collect-a-thon shooter where you play multiple main characters and unlock countless more by shooting your way through waves of enemies. Starting from the very beginning, you're thrown into a quick tutorial with barely any hand-holding outside of your main task, which obviously points you in the general direction it wants you to go. Absolutely love how the game expects you to explore and figure most if not all things out for yourself. Just know once you figure something out, it will be reused again sometime later down the line. It pays to have a good memory here. As for the combat, every character has their own unique attack, dodge, and melee to them, some even having an extra ability or passive that can be used to unlock extra areas. This makes it worth trying every character, even if the box they sit in gives you an idea on what they do. The general combat overall is pretty simple and straight to the point. Aim for the head and dodge every attack possible. A large portion of the game is just wave after wave combat, which becomes quite repetitive. It doesn't help there's not really a sense of danger, as you can cheese most mobs by simply walking backwards or in a circle. One thing they did was randomizing the mobs you get depending on what you've previously defeated. This is a nice little touch for the replayability, but doesn't change a whole lot except prolonging a few random fights. The boss fights on the other hand is where it becomes more complex, adding new and mixing old mechanics. Each boss fight is unique in its own right, regardless if most end in the same murderous way. They're all great to figure out, and you feel relieved once they're defeated. However, the downside to all of them is they require a bit of patience. Majority of them take a while to defeat, especially if you can't understand what's needed from you. Overall though, the combat is good enough for a playthrough, however it becomes quite tedious and brain-numbing the longer you play. As for the collectibles, you got your crowns, fossils, bones, cameos, special parts, and even Kentucky Fried Chicken buckets. You will not have a dull moment scavenging the worlds, to say the least. I hate comparing titles, but if you've ever played an older LEGO game, Funko Fusion gives a lot of nostalgia for that exact type of experience. Which, fun fact, makes sense as I learned after the fact the team consists up of many veteran TT devs. It all adds up. Now, while I much enjoyed figuring out what could and couldn't be collected in each level without progressing, I do wish there was a modern take on the unobtainable ones to make it a little more obvious. It can become frustrating to replay levels, not remembering what you've already collected in the past and have to look out for. It becomes a brainless expedition, which is where I can see a lot of people putting the game down, especially if they didn't grow up with or understand this type of collectathon. As for the puzzles, I was blown away by the amount of thought put into them. While they obviously have repeating ones for simplistic sake, there is always one or two per campaign that is completely next level. For example, this guitar puzzle in Jurassic World, there is no real clue given except what you see and hear. Yet the answer to this puzzle is playing the Jurassic World theme song. This is where I knew the devs were just having way too much fun. That being said, not all the puzzles were fun. Anything that deals with shooting through these very precise pieces of glass that also rotate or move made me almost go insane. I disliked almost every puzzle these were in, and it frustrated me beyond belief. Skill issue, I'm sure, but it's the puzzles of the game I never want to see again. Now, to go into something more positive, the attention to detail is quite marvelous. There is a lot of smaller details placed throughout that will make you do a double take. For example, if you catch on fire for long enough, your skin will burn off and expose your skull. I thought this was the coolest detail ever. You can also tell they pay homage to every character, cameo, and world they created, as they're all unique yet fully related to their origins, not to mention the vast amount of references thrown around within as well. If you know any of the crossovers you'll be playing through, you'll have an amazing time catching things, to say the least. If not, perhaps give them time, as they're constantly adding new characters and worlds to explore. Now let's move into the crossover world of Funko Fusion. Visually, it's quite stunning, and they did an outstanding job showcasing all the worlds they were pushing for. The worlds themselves are split up into an expanding warehouse's basement, with each story unlocking 6 main levels, 1 cameo world, and an unlockable character that can be obtained usually through multiple other stories. The entire game is quite linear, however doesn't hold your hand in the slightest. You're given your main task throughout each level and then can just freely explore. Very few levels will lock you from backtracking, which thankfully lets you do a lot of exploring prior to leaving. Most of the worlds have a clear path on where they want you to go, and they're pretty self-explanatory. The only worlds I didn't quite enjoy were the cities and enclosed spaceships. They confused me the most and had me going insane trying to find things within them. Speaking of finding things, the world design is where Funko Fusion truly shines, as each new world is filled to the brim with Easter eggs, references, throwbacks, and a lot of attention to detail to honor the original movie or TV cameo it's shooting for. As for the travel, the entire game is played on foot with a few movement and stamina mechanics. You can sprint your way to victory if you prefer not to walk, or jump roll into battle like a parkour master. The choice is truly yours. I would have loved to see some type of usable vehicle, as there are many spaces throughout the game you can't do anything with. The closest we get is a skateboard animation from one of the final Funkos you'll unlock. Good enough, I suppose. Now, the cameos of the game are split up between objectives, with the other variant providing its own entirely new location, filled to the brim with collectibles, references, and that world's set concept. Five Nights at Freddy's, for example, has an entire pizza plaza you gotta find coins in to survive the Five Nights at Freddy's. You can go explore the entire place, check the cameras, and even beat up the gang. There's even a hidden achievement to get bitten by Freddy, which gave me a good laugh. While the others can be found in the world like my boy Chucky, who you'll have to play murderous hide-and-seek with. As for the audio, I don't think anyone will have trouble becoming immersed, as they did a fairly good job with it overall. Most of the background tracks are fairly well placed, and a majority of them are spliced up copyrighted tracks you may already know, which can be a nice treat to bop to here and there. The only negatives I have come with the audio being randomly cut off at times, and having no option to get rid of the copyrighted music. Hey, you made it to the story section of my thoughts on it. I won't be covering the spoilers in depth, but if you would like to avoid them, skip ahead to the positive and negative section below. Ready? Okay. You play as many different characters spread across the main story, which is being told over multiple sub-stories. The main story tells of Freddy Funko, who we can assume as our Funko leader, being attacked by Eddie Funko until he's placed in intensive care. Eddie then takes his crowns and spreads them all throughout the Funko universe. It is now your job to restore Freddy's body and destroy Eddie by collecting all the hidden crowns spread across the multiple crossed-over worlds. And the storytelling overall is pretty bland. It's good enough to provide a reason for jumping between different Funko realms, however it's surely nothing to get really invested into. It's sadly the same thing for the sub-stories, as it's simple enough to get the point across and shows off exactly what it wants to perfectly, but once you've defeated the final boss, claim the crown, and listen to the small snippet of story explaining why Eddie is angry, you're pretty much over it and on to the next mini-story like nothing ever happened. There's nothing really memorable about the entire story outside of the final boss fight, which I thought was pretty cool, because it switches through everyone you've fought, with each phase being a skill you've learned along the way. It was a good fight to end it on, outside of the fact it's severely prolonged. The skills required to progress start repeating themselves, and by this time you're already over the waves of mobs. It would have been perfectly fine without prolonging it, but if you needed the fight to be longer, you could have mixed the mechanics up, or even made the boss start to roam. Regardless, the ending overall was pretty okay. I was mostly disappointed at the completionist ending, as it is very much just a quick, happy-ish cutscene and nothing more. I'd assume it's also a cliffhanger, but time will tell. As mentioned before, there are a total of 42 achievements, all of which took me 50 hours to obtain, with a single playthrough taking around 18. I will not be mentioning the ones handed to you just by playing, however let's start with the more missable ones, such as Funko Investor, where you must spend 25,000 vinyl in a single world. I missed this achievement by a landslide, as I would only purchase the items required to progress, and barely anything more. They all look so good, is to play every single story related character. This is also one of the final achievements I obtained, as you seem to dance the same few Funkos who have the abilities you need to progress. Environmentally conscious is to recycle over 50 cans or bottles you drank and squished up. I thought this achievement was the cutest way to teach people to recycle. Homage to the 90s is to play as Nick Angel or Danny Butterman and just shoot an entire magazine into the air. Classic. Now the hardest achievement award will be going to Everyone's a Fan of Something, which is collecting all there is to collect. Steam says a large portion of players currently own this achievement, however that's because they didn't have nearly as much content at release as I did today perfecting it. The difficulty just comes from having more to collect, and by the time you see this review, there might be even more to collect. Who knows? Now let's go over some of the positives. If you're a fan of Funko, cult classics, 80s movies, and licensed IPs, you're going to have a grand time. The visuals are cozy with a ton of Easter eggs. There's a lot of attention to details found within the worlds. It's a nostalgic collectathon, and they're still planning on adding even more worlds in the future. As for the negatives, it's fairly unoptimized for PC. The story is pretty lackluster, and the combat can become repetitive very quickly. In conclusion, Funko Fusion is a nostalgic, multi-universe, third-person shooter, but would I recommend it? Well, Funko Fusion is currently available for 45 Canadian doll hairs, or your regional equivalent on Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, or the Nintendo Switch storefront, with multiple free and paid DLCs also available. Now, if you go in expecting a cozy couch game you'll play here and there, you'll absolutely get your hours and money's worth. However, if you go in expecting something a little more hardcore, you will be severely disappointed. While I think the current price is okay with the vast amount of content it continues to provide, you cannot go wrong purchasing on a sale if this game has piqued your interest in the slightest. Funko Fusion. 4 out of 6. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. Once again, a huge thanks to 1010 for providing me a key to review. Let me know your thoughts down below, or what game I should complete next. Subscribe so you never miss a video, and until next time, take care.